Martha suffered additional anxiety and stress over her relationship with Lexi, who, by the time she turned 13, had gone from being a sad and sullen child and adolescent to a sad and sullen and angry teenager, feeling real resentment toward her mother. A House Beautiful staffer on a shoot at Turkey Hill told her boss, Mary Emmerling, that she once witnessed Lexi seated in the kitchen with a knife stuck in the table saying, "I'm gonna kill her someday." Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise. We're going to keep going in the Martha Stewart book today. Last time we read, we talked about how she had just begun that business at the Market Basket, and she had sort of gone under the table and hired a bunch of people to do the cooking for her. She also hired a manager for the job. So her involvement is a little bit minimal. It's not what she agreed to do when she talked to the owners of the establishment about what she wanted to do with that place. It was working, so they didn't ask too many questions, but they definitely did not like the independence that she had assumed, and they're going to continue to come to blows about that. One of their big issues with Martha is that they had agreed that if she got any catering jobs through her association with their establishment, that she would split the profits, and she's taking jobs and not telling them about it, and so it's like a continual cause of strain for them. Also, Andy has had big changes in his job, and now he's in the publishing world as opposed to the legal world. But this is opening up a lot of opportunities for Martha. She's always wanted to do a cookbook. She really thinks that would be a great idea. But we also got a chance to see Andy and Martha together screw over one of Martha's employees. Martha had hired a young woman, and she had a lot of personal problems. She was in the throes of anorexia. She was also just a very submissive person, very easy to kick around. And Andy and Martha knew that they could pay her a pittance, and she would do it because she really, really wanted approval. And so they got her to work on like this bestseller called Gnomes. And this book of gnomes went on to be sort of a cultural phenomenon. And there was all these byproducts and all this kind of other stuff. And they got her to do all the calligraphy in this book. Much of the flavor of that book is this sort of whimsical little world that, you feel like you've sort of like stumbled on this little like book that the gnomes have made, and so her contribution to the artwork of that book was integral to the feel of the whole project. They paid her $100 and didn't invite her to any parties and gave her no credit whatsoever on the first publication. On the second publication, they threw her a bone, but then after that, never again. And it's utterly shocking, especially when you know what a cultural phenomenon that book was, to have received nothing. It's not like the company was this small little publishing house that, barely had two pennies to rub together and they're, struggling to pay their employees. It was nothing like that. They just knew that they didn't need to pay her, that she wouldn't ask for, and that they could, pretty much do whatever they wanted with her. To add insult to injury, because there were so many spin-off products, this young lady, her last name was Negrin, she knew that it would be a great idea to do like a cookbook, a little gnome cookbook. And she worked in food. She was also very artistic. She'd done all the calligraphy for the first book. So she had made this little cookbook. She'd come up with all the recipes. She'd come up with all the little side articles in the book. She'd done this whole thing. Because she'd worked so intimately with the first project, this second project that she was making as a spinoff probably was very good. Martha saw it, grabbed it up, took it to the publishers, tried to market it as her own product. All she did was change the title. And the publisher wouldn't do it because he said, "Oh, no, you're Andy's wife. That's a little too close to home. We can't have the publisher's wife, trying to publish some gnome stuff. So no. We can't. That looks weird." So then Martha goes back and says, "Oh, sorry, they didn't want your book. We couldn't get permission from the original publishers." And that had nothing to do with it. It's just that Martha couldn't get credit for herself. So she just let the project die. It was just horribly, horribly hateful. Then we also read about how Andy has gotten cancer, and you'd think that that would bestir Martha to show some love and affection, and it did for a hot second, but she's back to treating him like trash, even to the point of telling him, "This is your fault you got cancer. You shouldn't have gone on that boating trip that caused trauma to the area when you fell out of the canoe. And if you got cancer, you got only yourself to blame." Even going so far as to tell others that Andy just made up the whole cancer thing because he's so pathetic. He just wanted some attention from her. So he thought if he lied about his cancer, she'd like give him sympathy or something. Oh, stupid man. So we got a flavor of Martha last week that was horrible. She's screwing over her bosses, she's screwing over her employees, and as usual, she's kicking Andy around and treating him like absolute shit. So, that's where we ended off last time. This chapter today is called The Proprietor. While the market basket under Martha's mostly absentee management was a glowing success, the operation she was running wasn't strictly kosher. By hiring freelance cooks who worked out of their home kitchens, and by buying their tasty concoctions for resale in the shop, Martha was circumventing local and state regulations. Those laws required that catering kitchens be separate from normal kitchens, meet certain health and sanitary standards, and be certified by government inspectors. The statutes were adopted by jurisdictions to protect consumers, but in those days, the practice of selling foods made in unlicensed kitchens was not uncommon, and Martha wasn't alone. In New York City, where the gourmet takeout shop concept was coming into vogue, sale of foods made in uncertified kitchens was the rule rather than the exception. Inspectors were hit and miss, and overworked enforcement officers were busy cracking down on restaurant kitchens littered with mouse droppings, rather than targeting housewives baking chocolate chip cookies in their unlicensed calorics. But someone apparently had dropped a dime on Martha's operation because the authorities started staking out her shop. I don't know how they found out, but inspectors were parked in the parking lot of the common market, said a former employee of Martha's. If we got caught, she told us to lie and say we're bringing in goods from her house, where I think she had a certified kitchen. But I was never stopped, and I was never questioned. Gail Lichtman-Mott confirmed the questions were raised about the legality of the pre-cooked foods sold at the market basket, and then ultimately a full working kitchen that was licensed was installed on the premises. Meanwhile, the Mocks and the Goldmans had other problems with Martha. Their initial sunny-side-up relationship had begun to sour. Martha's personality, for one thing, started to get on Dick Goldman's nerves. She always had to be number one, always in the limelight, and she was a bully to the people who worked for her, who were indentured slaves, he said. Vicky Negren was working in the store all the time and doing a wonderful job, but Martha was taking credit for it. Toward the end, Martha couldn't cope with all the different things that were required to run the shop and do the things she wanted to do, which was to promote Martha Stewart. Another problem involved the financial split from Martha's catering jobs, according to Pat Goldman. Any catering jobs that she got through anyone who came into the store or that was related to the store was supposed to be credited to us or billed through us. But that wasn't exactly happening. After a while, we couldn't quite figure out who brought in the business for whom. John Mocht, who handled all the common market's merchandising, also began to stew quietly over the fact that Martha was rarely on the premises as she had promised. In the end, he said, egos got involved. It got to be very complicated. The coup de grace occurred sometime in the second year of Martha's employment when a New York Times reporter, Florence Fabricant, whose brother was a friend of Gail Lichtman-Mock's, wrote a glowing feature about the market basket based on an interview that she had with Martha at the shop. When the story ran on the front page of the Sunday Times Connecticut section, the owners were furious. They felt Martha had taken undue credit for all the store's success. Especially annoying to them was the fact that she referred to herself as the proprietor of the market basket. A few days after the story ran, the outraged Mocks and Goldmans, having already decided to give Martha the heave-ho, called her into their office. We thought the story Florence wrote was gorgeous, wonderful, everything we would want, Gail Lichtman-Mock said. And as we're reading it, we see Martha Stewart, the proprietor of the market basket at the common market. And like the floor fell through. We were all aghast seeing the word proprietor. The guys were enraged. Suspecting she was about to be canned, Martha came into the boss's office fully prepared to fight to keep her job. This is how smart Martha is, said Lichtman-Mock, still amazed at her gall years later. She came in with a dictionary in her hand. And the dictionary was open to the word proprietor. And she said that the third definition of the word proprietor was manager, which is what she had been hired as. And she said her definition of the word proprietor was manager. We said, "Too bad, Charlie," and that was it. We fired her, and she walked out. Keeping her dismissal a secret, Martha left friends and her freelance cooks with the impression that she had departed the market basket to devote more hands-on time to her catering business. Well, just between you and me, I think that their explosion over the word proprietor is a little bit outrageous because it does mean manager. Of course, we're going to see this about Martha. She was a person that was very, very slippery when it came to words. A lot of her publications involve people questioning things and her showing them, yes, but that word could also mean, that's just who she is. She knows what you are going to think when you hear the word. But she's already prepared a defense for when you come questioning her. Well, why did you use that word? Well, because it also means ... She's a very slippery person. But I do think that This is like a frustrating situation to me, the relationship that she has with the Goldmans and the Mocks, because they like everything she's doing, they just don't like her, which she's not a very likable person, so I get that. But it feels like they're always like nitpicking on things like, you use the word proprietor and we don't think that you are according to our definition. But what you don't like about Martha is that she's an egomaniac who's not doing anything you said. Why don't you tell her why you really are mad at her? It's not because she used the word proprietor. It's because you hired her to be there in the shop and she's hired all these other people to do her job for her. And she's not even there. She's using your establishment to build credibility for herself in the community. Like, if you don't like that, that's what you should say, not, we object to the fact that this great, beautiful article that we loved everything about also happened to say that you were the proprietor. Excuse me, that's not what you are. Well, maybe that isn't what she is, according to your definition. But she's right. The definition also includes the word manager, and that's not why you're mad at her. So, like, quit with all these semantics and silly talk. Like, let's get to the real issues here. I can't stand when people just can't get to the issue. Just get to the issue. What are we dancing around for? You know, like we're just prolonging the inevitable. All right, now the next chapter is entitled Family Affair. In the spring of 1979, when Martha lost her job, her personal life was in a state of chaos. What a surprise. Well, Andy had completed his radiation treatments. It'd be another 5 years before doctors would know for certain whether he was out of the woods, and that added enormous anxiety to the Stewarts' already stressful lives. No wonder this guy got cancer. Can you imagine being married to Martha Stewart and not having cancer? That would be the miracle. Meanwhile, their marriage continued on its downward spiral. Privately, friends told Andy that if he rid himself of Martha, he'd rid himself of his cancer. They say the two were linked in some metaphysical way. I believe it. But a reader picking up People magazine around that time would have thought the Stewarts were the neatest, sweetest, hippest, healthiest, happiest couple to come down the pike since Mike and Carol Brady. The story, headlined, Martha Stewart caters for the Newmans and Redfords while Andy cooks up gnomes, was the first to introduce the superwoman and her husband to the masses. At that point, Martha didn't have a national reputation. But people got the popular media ball rolling, and soon the name Martha Stewart was in the mind's eyes and the Rolodexes of editors and TV show producers across the country, under L for lifestyle. The People article was generated by Martha through a friend of a friend who worked at the magazine. People photographed the Stewarts standing outside their Connecticut barnyard, Martha holding a basket of eggs laid by her chickens, and Andy holding a black chicken in his arms. There were shots of the photogenic couple sprinkled between the blocks of puff piece text. One showed Martha chatting up her writer pal Jill Robinson in the Stewarts' glorious kitchen, while all around them sophisticated-looking guests munched on smoked trout and almond dates wrapped in bacon. But what People readers didn't know was that the folks in the photograph were merely props, according to Barry O'Rourke, a well-known food photographer, who had begun working with Martha on Mademoiselle and House Beautiful assignments in the late 70s. On the day People visited Turkey Hill, O'Rourke received a telephone call from a harried Martha. She asked us to dress up and come over right away, because she needed some attractive people in the photograph. He chuckled. It wasn't like, gee, come on over because we'd love to have you for cocktails. It was, come over and be a prop. People compared the Stewarts with the Swiss Family Robinson and described Martha's growing catering business. And Martha revealed gossipy tidbits about her clients. Redford likes zucchini and banana bread. Beverly Sills the chocolate Victoria tartlets, and the Paul Newmans order the teriyaki for his racing crew. Out of the blue, at the end of what had been a routinely upbeat profile, y'all, this is so weird, Martha was quoted as saying, "We have never even come close to getting divorced." Well, Andy added, "There are difficulties between us, things that grate. She's more practical than I. I'm more theoretical, forgetful, a bit sloppy. If I leave something where it's not supposed to be, she'll say, 'What's XYZ doing here?' My carelessness annoys Martha, and her reaction to it annoys me." People readers waiting to hop into their dentist chairs must have been left wondering, what's this all about? But her friends knew. The Stewarts' marriage was in deep trouble. Martha suffered additional anxiety and stress over her relationship with Lexi, who, by the time she turned 13, had gone from being a sad and sullen child and adolescent to a sad and sullen and angry teenager, feeling real resentment toward her mother. A House Beautiful staffer on a shoot at Turkey Hill told her boss, Mary Emmerling, that she once witnessed Lexi seated in the kitchen with a knife stuck in the table saying, "I'm going to kill her someday." Emmerling wasn't surprised. Lexi hated, despised, all those people in her house shooting and photographing. She just hated it. She wasn't getting any attention. You could see it on her face. Here was this lonely teenager getting zero attention. Even Martha's loyal brother George had begun siding with Lexi because he didn't think she got enough attention from her mother. Martha arrived at the market basket one morning expressing concern about Lexi's emotional state in their relationship. It was Lexi's birthday, and Martha said Lexi was crying and complaining because her mother was never at home, never there for her. But when Martha did make an attempt to bond with her daughter, Lexi found fault with her methods, as did Martha's friends. One activity that drew criticism and smirks all round was Martha's decision to make Lexi a member of Martha's Ladies Who Lunch crowd. She began showing up with Lexi in tow at fancy Fairfield Hunt Club lunches, with Martha's girlfriends present. Lexi found the whole scene repugnant. There was a lot of tension between Martha and Alexis, observed Nayad Einzel, an illustrator who was a friend and neighbor of the Stewarts. Whatever Martha said, Alexis disagreed with. Martha would tell me something and say it in a sweet voice, talking about Alexis, and then Alexis would say, "It wasn't like that at all," or, "No, you didn't do it that way. That wasn't the way it happened at all." That kind of response may be typical teenager, but Martha and Alexis weren't close. At school, Lexi complained of various physical ailments, which Martha suspected were imagined. By the end of 8th grade, Lexi had come to despise Green Farms Academy and told her parents she wanted to go elsewhere. Martha and Andy took her to several boarding schools and found one that Lexi seemed to like. For 9th grade, she transferred to the very exclusive Choate Rosemary Hall School in Wallingford, Connecticut. While it was little more than an hour's ride northeast of Westport, Lexi rarely came home, even on weekends, so alienated had she become from her parents. After a year, she became dissatisfied with Choate too, and Andy had to make last-minute arrangements to get her admitted to his alma mater, the Putney School in Vermont, from which Lexi got her high school diploma. So, you would think that that's enough drama for one household. You know, your marriage is falling apart, your kid and you can't get along, you guys hate each other, like, let's not lie, neither one of you like each other. And then it's like, let's inject some more familial drama. So you'll recall that Martha had a little sister, young Laura, who was born when Martha, I think, was in her teens. And it had been a surprise pregnancy. They were not expecting to have this 6th child in the family. And I think everyone kind of resented Laura. Well, Martha certainly did, because she didn't want to have to take care of Laura all the day. And the dad was annoyed because, oh gosh, another mouth to feed, as if I need that. And there's already so much tension in the house that the addition of this family member wasn't like, oh, how jolly, how cozy, another little friend in the family. Hardly. Everyone is very mercurial. Everyone's looking out for themselves. They have no time for this new baby. So as a result, Laura grows up to be a bit of a handful, and she's got nowhere to go. So inject Laura into the drama of the Stewart house, because they're going to take Laura in. It goes about as well as you expect. The book said that Martha was also faced with serious problems involving her younger sister Laura and her aging father Eddie Costyra. By 1979, when she was 22, Laura, the baby of the Costyra family, had blossomed into a beautiful but troubled young woman who suffered from a drinking problem and bouts of depression. Her difficulties, family members said, stemmed from her relationship with the Costyra patriarch, who made life difficult for the last and unplanned member of the brood. As one family observer asserted, Laura's relationship with her father was horrible. He was a monster. Not often was he physically brutal, but he was an offensive, unpleasant person to be around, and it was very hard for Laura as a young girl growing up. Frank Costyra recalled how when his father once offered Laura some money for something, she angrily responded, "I don't want money. I want love." The situation had become so intolerable for Laura when she was a student at Nutley High that Martha moved her out of dysfunctional Elm Place and into Turkey Hill, which was dysfunctional in its own way. For about a year, Laura attended high school in Westport, but she ran into some problems that had existed at home. Like Eddie Costyra, Martha tried to dominate and control everything that Laura did. At the end of the school year, Martha suggested that Laura go live at the Stewart's Middlefield place. But Laura found rural life lonely and isolated. One day, she took the car out and ran it off the road. The Stewarts surmised she'd been drinking, which she had started doing as a teenager. Laura returned to New Jersey to finish school and was graduated in the Nutley class of 73. Unlike her high-achieving sister, Martha, who appeared on virtually every page of her 1959 yearbook, Laura seemed lost in the crowd. But her yearbook picture showed a smiling, pretty, self-confident graduate. The notation underneath was lyrical, joyous, and optimistic. Quote, "A field of tall hay, crown of wild flowers, song of birds, a whistle of wind, a deep blue sky, hand in hand, such a fine day." Like all the Costyras, Laura had learned to display a happy face in public. Of the Costyra children, only Laura failed to get a college degree, which angered and disappointed her father, who had always stressed education and ambition. Instead of going to Northeastern, where she'd been accepted, Laura went off with a pleasant young man whom she hoped to marry. The couple lived for a time in Florida, where they were involved in hot air ballooning. Their relationship ended, however, and Laura returned home. By the late 70s, she'd become a very unhappy young woman. As one observer noted, she'd come from an effed up family. She didn't have a job. She didn't have a career. She'd been in and out of relationships. Like George, Laura moved to Westport to be close to Martha, even though the sisters had a difficult relationship. A creative cook and baker like Martha, Laura worked on and off in her sister's catering business. On and off because Martha frequently became enraged at something Laura did and fired her on the spot. The two fought constantly. They'd go back and forth, said a friend of Laura's, who also worked for Martha. Martha treated Laura the same way she treated Andy, like dog shit. I can't count the times I saw Martha bringing Laura to tears with her criticism, with her mean-spiritedness. Not long after Andy had become president of Abrams, a new editor-in-chief, Digby Deal, good-looking, personable, bright, and single, was brought on board. He'd held the prestigious post of book editor at the Los Angeles Times. Martha took it upon herself, against Andy's wishes, to throw a party to introduce Laura to Deal, who was 8 years her senior. Andy was adamantly against Martha's playing Cupid because he thought that it would be awkward to have one of his key people dating his sister-in-law. In any case, Laura and Deal seemed to be a match, began seeing each other regularly, and Laura quickly grew emotionally and romantically attached to Deal. We had a very pleasant but intense relationship, Deal said later. While I felt that Laura was a really sweet young woman, she wanted very much to have a relationship. And that was certainly something that she sought, and I think that she needed. I didn't think that I was it, and I was letting the relationship trail off, essentially. She was a sweet young woman who didn't need any more trouble in her life, and I was certainly not trying to add to them. When it became clear to Laura that Deal was distancing himself, she became depressed and agitated. I came to understand partially through Martha and Andy, after the relationship with Laura and myself was over, that there were more serious problems than I had realized, Deal said. Those problems related to Laura and her family, particularly her father. But it's hard to imagine our relationship being that fundamental an issue in her life. Frank Costyra said Laura did have a breakdown. She'd been the underdog in the family since childhood. She started to drink a little bit and got heavy with the wine, and they were drinking on the job while she worked for Martha, and everybody was talking about it in the family, that Laura was imbibing too much, trying to drink her sorrows away and feeling sorry for herself, and that just led to more depression. There were times when Martha had to let her go. They'd spit venom back and forth at each other. They yelled a lot. Yelling's the way the Costyras talk, and Laura and Martha got into that. About Martha, Laura declared, "Our relationship has been a complicated one at times, because of the roles Martha assumed as a big sister, mother, employer, teacher, critic, and friend. Be that as it may, Martha has always been there for me when I needed her, and I will always love that devotion." Like all Costyra family members, Laura had been mentioned a number of times in Martha's published reminiscences, and Laura, like the rest, had been portrayed as having the perfect, happy life. There was one curious mention in the June-July 1992 issue of Martha Stewart Living, which deviated somewhat from the norm. In an essay entitled On Honesty, Martha complained, some thought ironically, about how dishonest public figures, a category that she certainly fell into, had become. Martha noted that a number of them, she pointed her finger specifically at politicians and sports personalities, are daily revealed to be masters of deception. She continued, "As a child, I was encouraged to tell the truth, and I did. My sister Laura remembered that I was a good child and never did anything very wrong, while she did everything wrong and told lies to escape punishment." Martha concluded by telling her readers that dishonesty is a thief of time, of energy, of pride. We must remember and teach our children, and perhaps our public figures, one essential: the truth will set you free. Thanks for the message, Martha. Anytime you want to get off that pulpit and start living the message, we're here for it. But let's take a deviation from this Laura story, shall we? What's going on with Eddie Costyra? He's the shadowy figure because, of course, he's been the drive behind Martha all this time. But is he still alive? Indeed, but not for long. The book says that by the mid-70s, Eddie Costyra's health had begun to fail, and he'd started drinking heavily. Before boarding the bus to his office at Heraclite Protective Fabrics in Manhattan, where his job involved selling plastic-coated, bacteria-free mattress covers, he started the day in the now famous kitchen on Elm Place with a bizarre concoction of orange juice, stale coffee, and red wine. And his drinking went downhill from there. Ed was killing the pain with vodka, his son Eric Scott, the dentist, acknowledged. At the time, I'm sure he was a heavy drinker, and that was strictly to kill the pain. The pain Costyra was experiencing was angina, one of the many symptoms of a serious heart condition that he had developed some years earlier. I don't know if that's angina or angina, but either way, his heart's not working. Costyra, who always had viewed himself as a doctor without portfolio, decided to treat himself mostly by ignoring the problem or by imbibing. What he needed was open heart surgery, but he kept putting off the inevitable. Martha had become aware of her father's drinking and was irritated with him and nasty toward him because of it. While she loved him, he was the only man she ever truly idolized, she also felt disgust, frustration, and anger when she saw his erratic alcohol-induced behavior. When, during his infrequent trips to Westport, he made boozy suggestions about how she could improve her beautiful gardens, Martha exploded with annoyance and irritation. But Martha was extremely concerned about her father's declining health, and during the spring and early summer of 1979 made several trips to Nutley, where she pushed, prodded, and finally pleaded with him to get double bypass surgery, which the doctors had recommended. On August 31st, 1979, Eddie Costyra was in bed at New York Hospital gaining strength for the operation scheduled for the next day, when he suddenly died. His death came just 10 days after his 68th birthday, and 28 days after Martha's 38th. Eddie Costyra's funeral mass, held at Our Lady of Mount Carmel Roman Catholic Church 4 days after his death, became one of the most embarrassing events in contemporary Costyra family history. Years later, Father Edward A. Haber, who presided, revealed, "I've never experienced anything like that in the 38 years that I've been a priest." This is very strange. Martha was in the front row next to her mother, who was wearing a veil and playing nervously with a ball of tissues. Andy, who had been at Martha's side when she learned of her father's death, had gone to Russia on a long-scheduled publishing business, with Martha's consent. The other Costyra's children, Laura, Kathy, George, Eric, and Frank, along with the dead man's sister, Estelle Burke, his brother, Hank Costyra, and assorted in-laws, cousins, and children, all sat quietly through Father Haber's mass. When it came time for the eulogies, only Frank Costyra stood and strode to the pulpit. For the next 10 minutes, reading from a prepared letter that he had intended to mail to his father before his demise, the third-born child proceeded to vent years of built-up anger and hostility. He spoke mostly in biblical terms, quoting from Scripture, using words like rebuke and admonish, which he'd picked up during a troubled post-Vietnam marriage to the daughter of a Southern preacher. Everyone in the church, whether they agreed with Frank or not, was shocked. Kathy's husband, Mark Evans, a lawyer, leapt to his feet, as did Costyra's brothers Eric and George, who moved swiftly toward the pulpit, determined to silence Frank. "It was really embarrassing," recalled a cousin. But Aunt Martha said, "No, let him be. Let him say what he wants." And Frank continued. "It was very embarrassing, truthfully, I must say, but embarrassing to the family, to my aunt, to myself. It was terrible. I couldn't believe what I was hearing in the church." Remembering the moment, Eddie Costyra's sister Estelle Burke, who was sitting with her daughter, said, "I was ready to go up and try to stop him myself. I was just seething, because after a person dies, you don't talk about him that way. My brother was very critical, yes, but he did it for the kid's good. Frank just kept going on and on and on and talking about my brother and our mother, and he knew things that he shouldn't have. But his mother said to let him go. I guess she wanted him to get it off his chest. The priest almost had a fit." Chuckling about the incident later, Father Haber said, "I was shocked. Usually at a funeral service, you get up and you say what a great guy the deceased was, but all of a sudden he began to harangue his father, saying that he wasn't too happy with the way he was a father." The priest said he had learned a very good lesson from the Costyra funeral. Now I ask people to write out and show me in advance what they're going to say. I was caught off guard that day, and I decided I'd never let it happen again. Years after the event, Frank Costyra said, "I think in some respects Martha was jubilant, because what I said were her own words also. She didn't like Dad in many respects. As far as I can see, she doesn't like men. She tries to use and abuse them. She didn't like Dad, because Dad was a very hard, stern, strict person when it came to things that we were doing. Martha got with me later and said that every single word I said at Dad's funeral was the truth. Her words were, 'It was the whole truth, Frank, the whole truth. Everything you said was true.'" After the embarrassing mass, the laying to rest in the Costyra family plot at Holy Cross Cemetery, and a delightful Martha Stewart prepared luncheon at Elm Place, the saddened daughter returned to Westport. The most important and influential man in her life, or so she said, was gone forever. Lohmann's, the discount women's clothing store in Norwalk, was best known for its designer label bargains, not as a place to mourn the dead. But that's where Sandy Broyard ran into Martha a few days after the funeral. Martha looked chic in a fringed suede jacket, jeans, and boots as she roamed the aisles, rummaging through the offerings. Martha didn't look downtrodden at all, Broyard recalled. She looked great. Martha loves bargains. She prides herself on spotting something inexpensive that has a designer label. So she was wandering around shopping, but she said she was kind of devastated. and felt very lost with her father being gone. I'm sure she does. Well, that's where we're going to end today. The next time we come together, we're going to read about how she screws over a couple of her friends and steals some of their ideas and markets them as her own. A reoccurring theme in this book. But the whole situation with Martha and her family is such a curious one to me. It's so interesting to me that they all seem like they really despised each other on so many different levels. Because as the book goes on, we're revealed more and more often how these siblings just were constantly butting heads. Like they didn't like each other. But they all sort of rely and lean on each other in ways you wouldn't anticipate. If I had such a troubled relationship with my sister, I can't imagine showing up at her house and living with her and working with her and for her and choosing that when I was already so sad. Like I was already depressed. I don't think I'd go into an environment where I knew I would just be sort of kicked around some more. But that's where Laura was. That's where her brother George was, who was also, kind of very, I don't want to say weak, but just in comparison to the other brothers, he was more fragile emotionally and physically. And he also leaned on Martha. Martha's a strong personality, so I suppose that if you felt you had deficiencies in the strength of your own character, you thought maybe being close to her would sort of fill those holes up in you. But all she manages to do is just make you feel like scum. So the situation of George and Martha both, going to their older sister and hoping that she would help them out and make them feel better. No. I mean, just look at the way she treats Lexi and her own husband. She never liked you growing up. Is she going to like you now that you're an adult coming and living on her quote unquote good graces? No, all she's going to see is that you're a failure and she's going to make you feel that way. And the situation with Lexi is astounding. But it is a complicated thing because Martha's never liked her. Lexi's resented that. And now that they're in this situation where Martha thinks, something's really wrong with Lexi, I guess I better show a little bit more attention to her. Now Lexi's in that rebellious stage where you can do no right. And she's going to let you know that, you're stupid, you're embarrassing, you're lame, you're dumb. And what can Martha do about that now? She never bothered to build any kind of relationship with Lexi when it mattered. And now Lexi's too angry even to accept the olive branch. So that relationship's going to be on a downward spiral. I mean, you would not believe some of the places that relationship's going to go towards the end of the book. Shocking. Shocking is what I can tell you right now. Well, thank you for hanging out with me. I'll see you guys again tomorrow. And, you know the way our week runs. So I'll see you then. Bye.